Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Max Glassman. I'm a co-director alongside Makena of the AI Law and Policy Committee under the AI² Center Student Club here at UF. And this is our committee's first event, and we're excited to have you all here. We appreciate you guys all showing up. So today's panel is going to be on AI policy, law, and ethics, and we're fortunate to have two UF faculty members who approach these questions from very different but deeply complementary perspectives. Professor Sonja Schmer-Galunder is the Glenn and Deborah Renwick Leadership Professor in AI and Ethics in UF's Department of Computer and Information Science and Engineering, and she directs UF's AI and Ethics program, and her background is in social anthropology. Professor, would you like to say anything else to introduce yourself?
No, you covered it all. It's really, thank you so much for the introduction. It's really nice to be here, and I'm happy and looking forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you. And next, we have Professor Jiaying Jiang, an associate professor of law at UF Levin's College of Law, and her research focuses on the policy and regulatory dimensions of artificial intelligence, fintech, blockchain, and digital currencies. Is there anything else you'd like to say to introduce yourself, Professor?
Well, nothing to add, just happy to be here. And thank you, Max and Makena, for hosting this.
We're so grateful to have you guys here.
We are so grateful to have you guys here. So here's how we're going to structure today. I'm going to alternate between questions between the two panelists and mix in some cross-panel questions along the way. And we'll save the last 10 minutes or so for any audience Q&A. And I encourage both of you to jump in on each other's questions whenever you'd like if you have a different perspective. So let's get started. Makena?
Yes, I can ask the first question. So for Professor Schmer-Galunder, I just wanted to start with something everyone on this call has personal experience with. You studied how politeness functions in social networks and human AI interactions, going back to your early research in 2010. AI assistants are now one of the most frequent conversational partners that a lot of people have, and they're designed to be unfailingly agreeable. They never push back, they never get offended. From your research on how politeness actually works socially, what kind of concerns you about a generation growing up interacting with entities that never hold them accountable or push back?
Yeah, I should ask you because you are growing up with it. I'm much older. How does that feel? I do have teenage sons, so there's like those experience points as well. And I can see how, on the one hand, I feel like a younger generation is growing up with the technology in a way that is actually agreeable to them, like that provides them automatically with like some sort of digital education that I sometimes dismiss. But I think the larger problem here with politeness and like what we call psychopathic like behavior in like chatbots is really that it depends on the use case, right? Like you don't want to have a chatbot in customer service that is rude or unfriendly. So it makes a lot of sense to have you know, just like a language that is like polite and agreeable to a customer, because like you wouldn't want to necessarily interact with the chatbot otherwise. The difficulty, of course, is when it in the social domain, right? And that's like where my lens is always that, like, what is the social or human component here? And then when it comes to human relationships, and especially throughout development, it can be quite problematic if your main social interactions become with a chatbot that doesn't have expose you to friction, or that doesn't like show resistance, because that is actually also part of forming your identity. It's also part of like growing up, that you like have like somebody like not agreeing with you, just like as a parent doesn't agree, so that you are also forming like your opinions around like the resistance. I think there's like really a lack of growth and identity formation that is at risk here.
So, Professor Jiang, your research kind of focuses on the use of AI in financial markets. Could you give us an overview of this area, kind of what the key benefits are bringing AI or AI is bringing to finance, and what the major challenges the industry is currently facing?
Yeah, sure. Well, AI has been reshaping financial market, particularly in areas such as trading. As for example, we have something called high frequency trading and also credit assessment, risk management, fraud detection, compliance, and financial advising. If I have to put them into categories, I would say the first one is related to predictive analysis. For example, AI can, we can use models to analyze like huge data set to forecast market movement, and then to analyze whether, for example, you want to, as financial institution, whether you want to loan money to certain clients to credit risk assessment. And another big category is I call it process automation. We can use different kind of AI tools that streamline back office operation and also for regulatory reporting and compliance. And the third area is the area I'm doing research now. It's called agentic AI system. This AI system, I would say, probably a new wave of AI development. They are more autonomous and capable of making decisions. For example, we have been using AI, or actually started to use AI in agentic AI in portfolio management. In terms of benefits and challenges, well, benefits, some of the benefits you are all aware of, for example, increase efficiency, reduce cost, especially operational cost and transaction cost. If I have to be more specific, for example, in financial advising context, previously, you need to have at least have some money or reach certain threshold in order to hire a financial advisor, right? But right now, AI can enable more individualized portfolio construction because you can just download an app and then start to invest your money. In the trading context, I would say AI can enhance price discovery. And once you figure out a certain price of certain stocks, and you can execute a trade immediately, and it can also provide liquidity. Another project I work on is money laundering. AI is pretty good at detecting suspicious activities, and we do see that a lot. We do see a lot of financial institutions start to use AI tools to do risk assessment and identify suspicious activities. And AI can also help with, coming up with report and submit it to regulators. And in terms of challenges, some challenges I think probably students have already know or you already read it somewhere. For example, bias. I think Makena just mentioned AI trained on large set of data set, right? The data could be biased, and of course the output could be biased. And if the data quality is not good, of course the output is not good, and the black box issue. And in financial sector, some scholars say, well, there could be systemic risk because a lot of financial institutions relied on very similar models trained on similar data, and this created a correlated behavior, and that will increase the risk of market instability because if something wrong with one financial institution, it will immediately impact other financial institutions. And it's probably more related to my research, which is the regulation and policy. I would say AI in this space develops so fast, and regulators, legislators find it very difficult to keep pace with all the AI developments, try to study all the risk, and they come up with regulations. It's a huge challenge right now because we try to do two things. One, we want to enable innovation for sure, and we also want to protect customers or investors in the market. So how to balance that, that's a challenge.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. Very detailed and very thought-provoking and interesting. I'm going to pivot to ask both of you guys a question. Feel free to delineate how you guys answered up. So, Professor Schmer-Galunder, you approach AI through a culture, values, and anthropology, while Professor Jiaying, you come at it through legal doctrine and comparative regulation. So, if a company deployed a hiring algorithm that performed differently across cultures, would you arrive at the same diagnosis, or does your disciplinary lens lead you to fundamentally different conclusions about what's wrong and what should be done?
Maybe I start because I also want to respond to something that Professor Jiang was actually saying that could help like frame a response to the specific use case of like, should we use AI for hiring? I think like what she was just talking about like is a perfect use case for the use of AI where it really makes a lot of sense, and that when there is like efficiency gains, when there's money saved, when there's like reductions in like cost of like time, And where there is also like, let's say, a limited world model, like a financial market, for example, is like, it's a system in itself that is, let's call it somewhat closed. It's probably not completely closed, but there's variables that you can measure. There's like predictions you can make, and there's accuracies that are attached to those predictions that are relatively good. Like it's a much more mathematical model. Humans don't just work like that. So when it comes to decision making, I feel that going back to the original questions about, like chatbots, for example, and resistance to asking for advice or using an AI for advice or using an AI for making decisions. Sometimes when you have a decision where two options are equally good, we call these hard decisions. It's actually really important for us to sit with those decisions and ponder and rationalize ourselves about like why one option would be better than another. But it's extremely tempting if you are like actually in a locked-in situation where both like outcomes are equally good for you to say, well, let's consult an AI in order to like take off the burden of making that decision. I think this is where it gets really problematic because this is when biases slip in, right? Because there is like obviously like a lot of bias is inherent in the data. And when you start to outsource like decision making to AI that is not fully a full representation of the diversity of the human race, then like I think that can start to be problematic. That accumulatively can then really lead to some sort of distortions, and we're probably gonna get to that later, like in like what I would like call, for example, a monoculture thinking. I think the same, and Dr. Jiang was just hinting towards that, is, for example, when financial markets collapse, right? There's like a recursiveness that is similar to like models training on synthetic data, right? There's not necessarily new information coming in that like could actually enrich our epistemic base, for example. So to answer more specifically to your question with regards to hiring, I think there's a lot to be said about um, actually, let me give you a different example from like some of my research. So I've done a couple of like space simulation studies where we
Hmm.
had 6 individuals lived in confined environments in a dome in Hawaii for a month, completely cut off. Sounds like very dystopian, but it's a very interesting study. And this was partly funded by NASA in earlier circles, and then later on by the Department of Defense. And you have the brightest people, you have the smartest people, you have the fittest people, and you're really trying to find the people that like are the best to be ever sent into space for a long period of time because that's what is required. However, we know from all these studies that you can get the best and the smartest people in a room, but like they often will fail these missions because of social components. There's a social conflict, people cannot necessarily deal with it, and the mission will fail, even though the people look amazing on paper. So take this as an analogy to like the hiring of people where you might have metrics that are good indicators of excellent performance, but you still like might not want to work with these people because they lack like fundamental social capabilities, even though they might be really good. So using hiring algorithms like reflects some of that, like the abstraction of like human qualities that are really hard to measure, but essential for like a workplace.
That's definitely a really good point to bring up. Like, AI can't really measure the human qualities that a lot of us would look for. It's just looking at what's on the paper.
That's a great answer. I would just quickly add that since I like Max that you put questions in context that make it easier. So in this context is hiring and bias, right? From the legal or policy perspective, and you also mentioned comparative law and different cultures. I would say different cultures or different jurisdictions may face different problems really depends on where you are. For example, I do a little bit of comparative study here, hiring and bias. A lot of literature have suggested that we do see bias or discrimination against marginalized group, right? Especially African Americans community, because the data, we don't have enough data about them. Therefore, the output, the hiring outcome somehow discriminate them. But the same situation does not happen in China. In China, it's not a racially diverse community. It's mostly Asian, and we don't have that problem in China. But we do see other problems. For example, in hiring context, women, especially women at the age of giving birth, it's very difficult for them. For example, the AI can filter women, for example, between the age of 25 to 30, because the employer know there's a chance you want to have a baby and you're going to take maternity leave, and they want to hire you, and they can use algorithm to do that. And we do see some evidence. And as you can see, we do have different problems in different societies. Therefore, the legal response and policies response will be different. So that's just one example.
Thank you. Great response. And I appreciate how you brought in perspectives of China's differences to the US and the culture differences there. Now I'm going to switch to a more focus on both of your guys' specific research, or you can go into use that as an examples. So this first question is for Professor Schmer-Galunder. So you've argued that AI risks creating what you call an intellectual monoculture, a world shaped by Silicon Valley's techno-solutionist values. You've drawn on Hannah Arendt's warning that our humanity diminishes when we give up thinking. So, as an anthropologist, can you give us a concrete example of a culturally specific form of knowledge or reasoning that's being actively threatened by how current AI systems are designed? And what would it look like to build an AI that preserves diversity rather than flattening it?
It's a matter of representation, right? Like, so we know what the kind of data the models are built on, and that is largely like English speaking, Western representations. Not only, of course, we have the cultural knowledge of the last 200 years also that is captured in books. So it's not like that it's like completely limited, but it comes through a certain lens. And I would say, argue that there's definitely what we call weird or Western educated and industrialized democratic societies that are overrepresented. And like certain communities are not just underrepresented, they don't even exist. Right? I've had a project of like Hausa women in Nigeria. This is a Muslim community that is like, illiterate, and they don't have a voice. They don't even have like really much say in their own society. It's because of their culture. How do you actually build a model for a community that lives on this planet but does not have a representation at all? So there's that, like just the sheer fact that not everybody is equally represented. The bigger problem with the monoculture part is that like values embedded in the models that are somewhat limited in its cultural representations are exported into other parts of the world. And when these models and when the AI is then integrated in societies that like holds fundamentally different cultural values, it can come to a clash. So the easiest form of misrepresentation is, of course, cultural stereotyping. So if you were to give like a large language model to a person, like say in Western Africa, and ask them to use it, and would prompt them to say like, how is my culture represented? It's very often like extremely stereotypical or like just like inaccurate. So there's like cultural representation that is not there. But I think the problem of monoculturalism is actually larger if you look at it from like a more complex system, like philosophical approach. And I will give you an example from the past that has nothing to do with AI, just to highlight what the risks are with this kind of like extractive and quantifying approach. So at the beginning of the last century, like when taxes were introduced in Europe, in Germany in particular, like people started to change like how forestry worked. So what happened here is that like the I'm making the word. So forest, so the trees were people started to plant trees in perfect geometrical position to each other so that they were legible, so that you could count them. And also in order to yield the timber protection. So you wanted to get most wood out of the forest, and you wanted to make sure that it's really easy to count. So when you look at images and you see like the trees next to each other, you see them like, aligned like little pencils in a tree. What happened though is that like as this kind of it's actually called monoculture forestry, or it's scientific forestry actually is the right term. What happened is that a lot of like the bushes and the insects and the resin, the whole ecosystem that actually maintained the forest was removed. So all you got was timber out of a piece of land. And it worked really well. It actually worked really well for almost 100 years. But what happened after 100 years is that the forest started to die and there was no wood at all. So why am I telling you this? It's because the kind of ecosystems that like sustain living organisms in nature require often a lot of what we consider noise or things that are unnecessary, things that we do not necessarily value or put a value on, because we are focused on the outcome. We are focused on like what provides us like with some profit or money ultimately. And that is exactly the case with like say AI functions that are optimized for a specific target that we want to maximize. We actually undermine the conditions that are actually creating something that is much more meaningful in our own lives. So when I talk about monoculture, I feel like there's really a risk when we are building AI systems that we are focusing too much on what is quantifiable and completely ignore the things that are not quantifiable, even those are the things that actually make life meaningful.
That was a great response. I don't want to comment too much on that. I think you summed it up pretty perfectly, and I appreciate that response. McKenna, do you want to go on to the next question?
Yeah, I can ask the next question. So, kind of for Professor Jiang, so building on AI in financial advising projects, like some of the research you have done, do you think that AI could eventually replace human financial advisors? Kind of why or why not? And what factors do you see as most determinative in that evolution?
Yeah, I think we hear that questions a lot, right? Will AI replace financial advisors? Will AI replace lawyers? Will AI replace computer science, artists, etc., right? Sometimes it really depends on who you talk to and you get different answers. And I would say my views also changes given what I have seen over the years. I would say pre-generative AI time. I think in a book chapter I wrote, well, AI can replace some, very daily repetitive work that does not require human creativity, does not require human empathy. And post-generative time, especially after the release of OpenAI, well, I do see some AI tools can generate pretty creative artwork. So my view changed a little bit. So now I think my answer is, at least for the short period of time, not a long period of time, I don't know, maybe for the next 5 years, I would say AI can replace some task of a profession, but will not replace the entire profession, at least in the near future. So I would say that's my answer for now. I will give you an example. Legal profession. Will AI replace lawyers? I would say no. But will AI replace some tasks that lawyers have to do? The answer is yes. For example, contract reviews. In the past, lawyers, especially junior lawyers, we need to spend hours and hours trying to review all those contracts, sometimes thousands of pages. And you take weeks, some days and weeks to do that. Now AI can do that within minutes, within seconds. Then why do we want to spend clients' money on those work, right? And another example is e-discovery. Previously, it was so difficult, and now just AI can do it in seconds and discover very relevant evidence. We can just use AI to do that. So AI can certainly replace some tasks that lawyers do, but would it replace lawyers? At least not in the near future. Similarly, in a financial advisor context, AI can do some of the tasks, for example, tax loss harvesting, portfolio rebalancing, but some things AI probably is not very good at. For example, maintaining customer relationship and those clients with high income, a lot of asset, they may still want to pick up the phone and talk to their financial advisors. So part of that cannot be replaced. And in the future, I would say I just try to leave a positive note here. A lot of profession, yes, AI gonna replace a lot of tasks, but AI also gonna help create new profession. For example, like 20 years ago in the legal sector, we cannot imagine, we're gonna have a chief privacy officer in the institution. And now, because the use of technology, a lot of institutions we have a chief privacy officer. See AI help or technology help create new professions.
That's a great
Yeah.
response, and definitely a little, quelches some fears about McKenna and I's prospective career paths. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um,
And,
we'll
and
we'll move
maybe
on to the
maybe
next
maybe
question.
I want to add
Yeah,
something
of
about the
course.
Oh,
job
sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
market because there's actually a pretty famous anthropologist who unfortunately died. His name is David Graeber, and he wrote a book called Bullshit Jobs. So excuse me for the language, that's the title of the book. Where he said, or he was writing about, he was at the London School of Economics and was writing about it, about like half of all the work that is being done is actually completely meaningless and socially destructive. But it gives people meaning. The
Mhm.
actual work is not necessarily something that needs to be done and could be easily, efficiently removed or done in shorter periods of time. So I feel like AI is actually forcing us to come to terms with the fact that like we are already engaging in a lot of work that isn't necessarily that is not necessary, but it's meaning giving. And people will like to feel important to some degree. But on the other hand, like there's also a lot of work that is being done that is actually psychologically training and monotonous. Somebody like filling in spreadsheets all day. So using AI, for example, to like ensure that like the work and life quality of people is actually, improving is a really good idea. Like when we are saying like,
Mhm.
okay, we use AI here in order to do like these tedious tasks that nobody wants to do anyway. On the
Yeah.
one hand, on the other hand, like we might have people who want like doing tedious tasks, right? And like I've been on panels where somebody like was working at like I think it was like a tax agency, and he just, and I said, oh, these jobs are draining, and he came up to me afterwards and said, I like my job. I want to go in at 9 o'clock. I want to go home at 5 o'clock. I don't care what I do. And I realized that like I was arrogant about that because I thought everybody wants to think deep thoughts all day, but it's not necessarily the case. So
Mhm.
I think we really have to come to terms with the larger question as to what is actually meaningful work and what
Mm.
actually is really complementing the kinds of things you enjoy doing and are, giving you like a sense of accomplishment. And in the context of AI, I think this should be the first and foremost question when it
Mm.
comes about future careers. You have like the unique opportunity here in a way to shape your own futures and even shape your own jobs, right? Like you don't necessarily have to give in always into like what is being presented and you are at the receiving end of like maybe I'm gonna get a job at big tech, and then like you are at their command. But on the other hand, you have actually more opportunities with AI to say, well, I think I'm going to use AI to do something good in the world, and this is how I'm going to do it. And you are the creator of your own job.
I think that's a very inspiring way to put it. It's definitely something I'm trying to internalize as I move forward with my career, and a great addition to the response by Jiang. So thank you for that, Professor. Do you want to cover the next question for both of them?
Yeah, so this is kind of just a general question for both of you guys. So Professor Jiang, you've mapped kind of how the EU, China, and the US all define AI risk differently. And then for Professor Schmer-Galunder, your work kind of suggests even defining what counts as harm is culturally contingent. And if harm is culturally specific, but AI systems are deployed globally, is a universal AI governance framework even possible, or is that goal itself a form of the monoculture that you've talked about?
I can quickly answer this question. Yes, I do some comparative study, and I don't think a global AI governance framework is applicable, especially given each jurisdiction, they have their own policy priorities, their own goals to address AI harm, and sometimes harms are different in different contexts. So it's very difficult to have one set of rules to address every issues. And in terms of AI regulation or AI governance, I always argue that we need to understand risk or harms contextually. For example, here in the United States, AI has been used in different areas, different sectors in education, healthcare, finance. I'm not an expert in other areas, so I can't say, well, we need to use the same method. But even in the financial sector, AI can be used in different places and create different risk. For example, when AI is used in trading, when AI is used in financial advising, and and even in crypto, they create different kind of a risk, and therefore, to address those risks, we need to have slightly different solutions. But another related issue is, do we have can we have some common grounds? I think that answer is yes. At least at the end of the day, we don't, in the finance space, at the end of the day, we try to protect investors in the market. Now the question is, how do we protect investors? What are the most important interests for investors? We can have an answer on that. And then based on that, we come back to our different approach in different sub-financial spaces and then propose solutions. So I would say, risk has to be understood contextually, and then the response should, be put out like accordingly. That would be my short and quick answer.
So I think we do actually need, I disagree on the global aspect for certain types of regulations in order to counter certain harms, but also just like more broadly, maybe global regulation. I think there's like red line areas where I think it's really important that like the global community comes together, especially when it comes to military applications or when there is like harms or threats to the environment that affects everybody. I don't think that like you can like really think about like country borders as something like where, a nuclear explosion will never like stop, for example. So there's definitely like the UI like also talks about like high risk, areas where I think global collaboration is really important, but also in other domains where the harms are maybe not so decisive, but much more accumulative over time. Like for example, like currently, I was just um, at the conference of the International Association for Safe and Ethical AI, and one of the things that is being discussed is really the right to know if you are actually interacting with an AI, and that everybody on the planet should have the right to know if they are actually interacting with an AI, especially if they are getting so good that you cannot necessarily distinguish that anymore. Or if you're coming from a vulnerable population that has a really hard time distinguishing that, just think of your grandparents, right, when they're getting a robot call. So I think that's really important. And like the kinds of harms that are downstream of that are, again, much more distinct to the politics of countries. And what I mean here is that accumulative risks can really mean that you might like really undermine like societies because you undermine trust. You undermine trust because you are not like trusting like whether or not you're talking to a human or an AI. You are not trusting the information ecosystem anymore because it's completely full of like deep fakes. And those harms, I think, are much more fundamental. In fact, I would call them existential. Um, and of course, that then can lead to power grabs. And if whoever like owns the technology like has the ability to control the population, which is what Hannah Arendt that you were quoting before was actually talking about. And then yeah.
I find that response super interesting, especially from a political science perspective. I'm a political science major. Definitely, there's a distinction between what should be global governance framework and what's actually going to happen. It's like climate change. Obviously, it would be a perfect solution would be for all of us to come together and uh, work together for a solution, but that doesn't necessarily play out in practice, does it? So I appreciate that response, and I think that's a very interesting, nuanced take to understand sort of projected direction. But um, I think we're going to move to sort of some harder of the policy questions, some pretty specific stuff. I'm going to start with you, Professor Jiaying Jiang. So with their DARPA-funded work on the Hugo project that explored using social theory and AI to moderate online conversations by fostering pro-social behavior, it doesn't not just punishing toxicity, but actively encouraging healthier discourse. However, your more recent research found that LLM-based moderators sometimes look effective to outside observers while not actually changing how moderated users feel. Given that gap, is there a danger that platforms adopt AI moderation as a shortcut that looks like progress, but it masks deeper problems? And how should policymakers account for that?
Let me get the question right here. So I think, or maybe I answer, maybe I understand if I understand you right. Like you're asking me about the information ecosystem and the role of moderation in the information ecosystem
Mhm.
from where we were when we had, like, say, community nodes at Twitter, which were like humans collectively like agreeing whether or not something was factually accurate, to where we are today, where we have effectively no moderation. And if so, maybe we have like large language models that are not necessarily trained on factual data, right? So I think one of
Yeah,
the solutions to this problem, for example, it really is that we have to distinguish between a belief, including a cultural belief, and what is actually fact, right? And like we currently don't necessarily have that. And as long as we don't have models that make this distinction, I think it becomes very difficult because a lot of relativism like sips in. So I think the moderation that we currently need, that we don't necessarily have, and there are, by the way, no incentives for that, and I can say something about that in a minute, is that it's very hard for any user in a digital information ecosystem to really understand like what is actually factually accurate. And that doesn't mean that deepfakes are always wrong. Deepfakes can be used in order to, provide you with like true information. At the same time, real non-AI generated non-AI generated images can absolutely be used in order to distort information and like spread lies. So it's not just like the AI itself is problematic. The problem are, as I said, the incentives, and that is that incentives for high quality information are going down, and the incentives for low quality information and frankly crap are going up because the costs are so low. And because we have an ecosystem that is completely full of like low quality information, you cannot like really like find the needle in the haystack anymore, or it becomes increasingly hard. So I feel moderation today from where we were before. You were talking about like a couple of years ago, we were really interested in like how can we counter hate speech? How can we get people to be nicer to each other? How can we, foster pro-social discourse? We've gone far away from that. I feel like we are really like we're having a much bigger problem of an information ecosystem that is about to collapse, unfortunately.
I, yeah, I can definitely start to see that. Being part of the younger generation who's extremely active on social media and how we process information. The last couple of years, you can definitely see a distinct gap in how true information is perceived, where it's found, and the mixture of misinformation and, frankly, misinformation and disinformation that's being promoted to as truth. Um, so this question is going to move on to Professor Jiang. So you wrote in the Florida Bar News a couple of years ago that if attorneys rely on AI-generated legal analysis without verifying that they could face malpractice claims. And we've already seen lawyers being sanctioned for filing AI hallucinated citations. But here's the harder question. As AI tools get better, will there or has there come a point where a lawyer who missed something that an AI tool would have caught is the one who's negligent?
Well, I'm glad that you pay attention to news. That's also a very good point. I would say I do see the possibility given how capable AI is. And then I also like to share an essay I just read titled Something Big is Happening. And it's published last month that written by Matt Schumer. I'm not sure if you've read it. It's all over my LinkedIn and also circulating among our law faculty. He argues that we are already in the midst of a transformative AI revolution, one that many people don't fully grasp yet. He compared today's moment to February 2020. Think about 2020, just before COVID exploded into public consciousness. He suggests that most people are currently in the phase where the change seems overblown, even though a much bigger shift is already underway. So that's his argument. I kind of agree with that. We are not yet fully grasp where we are in terms of AI revolution. I think we share the same view that AI has reached a new threshold of capacity. The latest AI model, for example, OpenAI's GPT 5.3, is no longer just tools. I think the system can meaningfully contribute to their own improvement. For example, they also use reward learning and agentic system, etc. So AI at some point will disrupt or already disrupted cognitive job more broadly and quickly. I can give you a more concrete example. If you don't use AI, you may not do your job very well. Related to another research project focus on money laundering. Right now, financial institutions are required by law to meet anti-money laundering rules, in short, AML rules, because financial institutions, they need to process so many transactions every single day, right? Then how do you meet your regulatory requirement by, for example, identifying suspicious activities and submit those suspicious activities report by your human eyes? You hire a bunch of people to review manually those transactions and try to identify suspicious activities. No, it's impossible to do. One, given how the volume of transaction every day. And second, some of the connections are hidden. You are not able to see it so easily. But with AI, for example, with pattern recognition, with supervised machine learning, with network and graph analysis, all these systems they're so good at detecting some unusual patterns, behavioral issues, and also hidden relationships. And we do see a lot of like AI analytic firms. They use all these AI tools to help financial institutions to meet their regulatory requirements. And I would say if you run a financial institution, if you don't use all these tools, you cannot do your job. You cannot even comply with the law. So that's a very good example we have seen today. And in terms of lawyers, would that be at a point if you don't use AI and you're going to fail your job or you're going to come to malpractice? Yeah, I would say very likely. I just gave an example of contract review, right? E-discovery. I think most of firms are using all these tools to do contract review and e-discovery. If you still rely on humans or junior associate to do contract review, of course, we always, at this stage, we still need human or lawyers to take responsibilities, but we need to use those tools. If you don't use it, you just wrap out hours and hours and clients won't pay for that. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I definitely
Thank
think
you for
that's a
that.
yes, I definitely think that's a really interesting response,
Mhm.
especially talking about how you spend hours and hours reviewing a contract and you could still miss something.
Yes, yes.
So I think AI just kind of it's a very good tool to help
Mhm.
you start and then you can review that information as
Mhm.
well.
And another funny story is Whenever I start a new project, I always make sure I do literature review, do complete literature review, right? And I ask my RA to find, for example, first version of most relevant articles, and my RA just create an agent and try to pull out all the relevant articles. And I would say the first version is pretty good. Uh, um, of course, I always ask Maya to verify this article exists, and we all go back to read it and to see whether the main claims, the main arguments are correct. But the first step is great already. My eyes don't have to spend hours trying to collect all the relevant articles. AI can do the job pretty well.
Mhm.
Great.
Yeah,
I,
that's
I mean, obviously, see that in, how, even just as a student, undergraduate student, whenever I do research, whenever uh, I'm so awe dropped every time I even just type in your research of this topic and the amount of depth and brevity, and concise information that it provides. And then I'm always expecting it's got to be wrong, and I double check the information,
Yes.
and it's 100 usually correct. Obviously there's this risk of hallucination that you have to be conscious of, but it's really, especially seeing it grow from 2022 just to now. It's
Mhm.
really impressive. McKenna, do you want to go into our final main question for both of you guys?
Yeah, so our last question is many of us on this call are undergraduates trying to figure out how to contribute to AI governance rather than just react to it. And Professor Jiang, you contributed China's regulatory analysis to Stanford's landmark AI governance report. And then Professor Schmer-Galunder, you're building the AI ethics program here at UF. What's one concrete thing that undergraduates at UF can do right now to actually shape this AI policy?
To shape what AI policy? Sorry, I missed the.
Yes. So just kind of talking about the governance of AI in general. I mean, I know you had some
Not a
hearings,
specific policy. I
not,
see.
yeah, not specific
Okay.
policy, just governance in
Yeah.
general.
Okay. So I think I'm a big proponent. Should I go first, or did you want to answer? No, I'm a
Sure.
big proponent of like the use of AI in collective decision making, and we have seen like a lot of really great examples where this can work really well, especially in small scale nation states, like in Taiwan, for example. There have been like amazing um, examples where the government stepped in and said like, okay, we cannot necessarily make a decision on something that like affects its population. In the case of Taiwan, for example, they didn't know whether or not they should allow Uber in the country, and the population was completely divided on the issue, and they couldn't really like pass a policy because there was a deadlock. So how are you going to make a political decision about like a regulation that affects everybody where like the population is divided? That so they used a platform called Polis, where the citizens were able to then voice their opinions and their concerns on either one of the sides of the issue. And the algorithm could actually help surface what the two different parties had in common. So instead of just saying like yes or no, you can like use AI in order to provide nuance and rationales and reasoning as to why you say yes or as to why you say no. And if you then start to look at the reasons, you see that there's a lot of commonalities between like polar opposites. So what Taiwan was, for example, able to do is then pass legislation under certain conditions. We said like, okay, we're gonna like let Uber into the country, but we want to make sure that none of the drivers are drunk, or like kind of like things that like citizens were actually concerned about. So I like this example because this is the kind of governance model that I would like to see more of. People do actually have a lot of localized knowledge that oftentimes government bodies don't necessarily have. Using AI in order to tap into the knowledge and also the perspectives of the people and help surface what is actually of concern could really inform policy. It can also provide mandate if you actually have a lot of people like participating and you like, do this like it's a representative and democratic way. So that's one model that I would like to see at the university tested. Maybe Professor Jiang and I can actually work on that to get that going. We could like should do a use case and get the students together and say, what is like a policy, like on it really as a toy example, what is a policy that the students are like really divided on, and can we do some sort of like town hall experiment also where we can like do an exercise of collective decision making around AI, of course.
Yeah, well, I'd agree. Probably very important experiment to begin with. I have to say this is a very difficult question, and also because you all major in different areas, right? Different disciplines, and hard to give one advice that works for all students. But I'm also glad that you start to think about these big problems, big issues, and try to participate, and that's very promising. Great. Um, I would say first, you still need to study your discipline very well and build your expertise. For example, my students and my law students, they would tell me, "Oh, your research is so interesting, AI in financial space. I want to be an expert in that." I always tell them, your 1L year, the first year law courses are so important. You need to build a foundation. You need to understand contract. You need to understand basic business law in order to come to, you cannot jump from 0 to 10. You need to build those foundations and become an expert in that area before we can talk about, you cannot be a expert in AI and financial regulation without learning basic, for example, basic banking law. So you always need to build that layers of expertise. So for the same for undergrad students, if you are in, for example, computer science, if you're in marketing, do your job well, study your discipline well, and then build your expertise. And AI gonna be integrated in different disciplines. And our lawmakers and policymakers, they do not know all the nuts and bolts. So that's where you come into play. You know political science very well. You know accountants very well. You know computer science very well. You can, for example, as lawyers, we always write amicus brief to court. Sometimes judges, they don't know all the areas of law, right? So we can write to judges. Similarly, if you are an expert in your tiny field, you can also write to policymakers, to lawmakers, and you can publish and you can educate other people. That's one way to participate in broader AI governance.
Thank you. That is an amazing response. And that's a question that I've had to deal with and grasp as I try to, prep myself for a law school career. I think about, do I go specific into this AI niche that I'm super interested about, or do I generalize first and just become understand my field of science, which is political science. So I think that was a great response and a great piece of advice. At this point, we have around 5 minutes remaining in the panel. If there's any community questions from those in here, you're welcome to either unmute yourself and ask them or put them in the chat. And if there's, in case there isn't any questions from you guys, we do have backups to continue the panel as well. These last 5 minutes.
Also, I was going to kind of just open up the floor to our professors if there's anything last minute that you kind of wanted to add, anything that you've kind of wanted to say, but there hasn't really been a question for, that's definitely welcome here as well.
Oh, there's lots to be said.
I'm just glad that, students, especially undergrad students, are interested in this area and they start to think big questions. Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's encouraging to see that, you are taking initiative for sure to do a panel like that. And also, yeah, just reiterating the importance of like AI and that you can and should not ignore that. I think what Dr. Jiang was saying before, that like we are quoting an article, like that we are already like right before a pandemic. I think that's exactly spot on. Like, so in educational careers where you are educating yourself without, let's say, ignorant to the wave that is like coming, seems ill-advised.
So I guess I'll close it off with one final question for both of you guys. So obviously, as we've seen, AI is moving in terms of weeks. There's new iterations, and that bring out just a month ago, co-work didn't exist, and now that's taking over and revolutionizing different spheres that way. So when this technology is advancing in such a short time period, legislation takes years to develop, and come to fruition. Even doctoral research that you guys do moves even slower and is even a longer time scale. So how do you manage the tension between being rigorous and then ensuring that your research is relevant?
We have about 4 minutes left, right? Let's see if I can answer this in 2 minutes. Um,
Sorry about that.
well, I would say always find an anchor. For example, the new project I focus on is agentic AI, the use of AI in financial advising. But the legal issue I study is fiduciary duty. Would financial advisor violated fiduciary duty? Fiduciary duty is a very traditional kind of like important question in this space. So I could somehow connect these two. Agentic AI is a new thing, but fiduciary, how would that challenge a fiduciary duty? Well, a fiduciary duty is an old question in the new, come on, new settings. And there's always an anchor and make sure, your work's still citable, still relevant in the next few years. Of course, technology going to change. They're going to be another wave of agentic AI or something other AI, but we still have fiduciary issues since human are involved, right? Human advisors are still there for the foreseeable future. So always, if you are a PhD student or graduate student, always find an anchor. Like I said before, you cannot jump from 0 to 10. You always need to do the literature, understand the big questions. And then when there's a new things comes out, and how would that challenge these important and foundational questions? 2 minutes.
Thank you for that.
That was great.
Okay, good. Well, it's not just like fast moving, it's also unknown, right?
Mhm.
In addition to that. So it's extremely hard. I think we have to adopt a long-term perspective. I think
Mhm.
that's the only way to like really approach it because you will always lag behind. I think it's not, I look at it as an opportunity to like rebuild in a way a society that is in a AI enhanced in my like own utopian like worldview where we can like really envision, and we should really use like things like speculative fiction, for example, in order to envision what is the kind of future society that we would like to see if all of these things fall into place, even though they haven't completely fallen into place yet. But let's think about what is the future going to be like in 5 years or 10 years or 50 years from now, and then walk backwards as to this is the ideal kind of scenario where everybody like lives affluent, like we have eradicated diseases and poverty. What are the conditions that we have to be working on right now in order to get there, and then work towards that? I think like trying to always play catch up is yeah, nonsensical. I think you have to like really look far ahead and then walk backwards.
So yeah, I kind of want to thank both Professor Schmer-Galunder and Professor Jiang for an incredibly rich conversation. This is our inaugural event of our AI Law and Policy Committee under the AI² Center Student Club, and I honestly can't think of a better way to have had it launched. And for anyone on this call interested about getting involved with our committee or the AI² Student Club, feel free to reach out to me or Max to get involved. And thank you to the AI² Center and Marquise for supporting this event. Thank you to our panelists for your time, your research, and your willingness to engage. And then have a great evening. Thank you so much.